So I was reading an article about Kentik, and they talked about you were observing a cyber attack in Ukraine.
Well,
we allowed to talk about that?
yes, we're allowed to talk about that.
Okay.
It turns out that a lot of those cyber attacks are really more like kidnappings almost. It's like,
I was curious for you to continue and tell me, like, what are you doing in Asia?
so we have probably a couple dozen customers in Asia. So there is a conference, JANOG, the Japanese Network Operator Group Conference, that is the week before the Pacific Telecom Council conference that happens in Hawaii. And I decided to go to both conferences and wound up getting to neither, but it was an excuse to start scheduling an Asia trip. We had too many customer meetings, so we did a couple days in Seoul beginning of last week, where I learned that I was mispronouncing Taekwondo, which I practice at practicing. I sort of suck at it, but, I've been doing it. A little over a week in Japan, and then we have a bunch of customers there as well. And my wife and I like going to Japan, and then Hong Kong, where my wife has not been back to, and decided to do a few days while we were here. I just decided we're getting older, and once I adjust to the time zone, might as well, stay over here for a little bit longer. So,
where's your permanent residence?
In Seattle. I'm from Philadelphia. So, yeah.
Very cool. And so you guys, what's your favorite thing to do over in Japan?
Well, that would have to be eating. And most of the kinds of Japanese cuisine I love. That's probably 80% of my Japanese is food. 15% is Shotokan karate words. And, 5% is don't touch my mustache, and, all the don't touch your mustache, and all the, the 20 words that you learn to grease social lubrication. Second might be sumo, although we didn't go to sumo even though it is on. I just didn't have time this trip. But there actually bleacher seats was exciting because in July we were there and we went to sumo in Nagoya, and we had to sit tatami. We didn't have to sit seiza, where you like sit on your knees, but we had to sit tatami, and my American body is not designed really to do that. So we sort of cheated and got these little footstools at the Daiso and sort of sat on the footstools. Like the 2-inch of elevation helped a lot. But so it's fun to see the sumo, so much more intimate stadiums than we have in the U.S.
I heard from a friend that the technology there is crazy when you're walking around the streets and the vendors and all of that it's just incredibly advanced technology. Is that true?
So I think that used to be even more true. I'm not sure that's as much true, but Libby, who runs People for Kentik, lived in Japan for a number of years and taught. And I said to her this morning, do you notice how quiet it is, in the United States sometimes? Because when you go into a food hall, or even when you go into the convenience store, Family Mart, 7-Eleven, Lawson's, everything is like talking to you and beeping, and every time the doors open and everyone's, irashimase, or just like as you're walking by all the stands in the food hall, it's all very sonorous in its own way, but it's definitely a different experience. So. But now that we have Google Maps and electronic payment and these things that you used to, in Korea and Japan, there used to be cell phones for that. Like I used to go to Akihabara, Electric Town, and get like Sony Vaio laptops that Dynamism used to import for $5,000, and it was cheaper to go to Japan and get them. But
That's
Apple
pretty cool.
makes some really good laptops with like high resolution, good battery, and they run Unix. So what more do you want?
I want the Vision Pro. That's what I want.
Okay. Well, you can, you can have that. I guess that'll be an interesting one I'm sort of following from a distance, smart glasses and VR and the intersection there. And hopefully no one will be beat up for being creepy with those. So, we'll see.
So how do I pronounce the name? Is it Kentik? Is that how I say your company name?
Kentik, Kentik.
Okay. And what is it exactly that you guys are doing?
So network observability. So we take telemetry from the infrastructure layer that's in and around the network, and we make it usable for people. So when an Uber driver asks me, what does my company do? I say, we make the internet go. Or next version longer, we make the internet, we make networks fast and secure. And so our customers are IT, service providers, web companies, people that deliver their packets as their revenue, people that the network doesn't go, the company doesn't go. Those are the kind of folks that we are direct buyers. And then we have other users in the company and security and cluster operations and work with other observability players. But that's primarily what we do.
Nice. Are you the founder of the company?
I am a founder and I run the company. Yes.
How did that come to be? How did the company start?
Well, I was at a company called Akamai, large content distribution network, for about 10 years and did a bunch of federal work. And after I left Akamai, some people asked me to build. You ever see Silicon Valley, the show?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. They wanted me to build the box. So I built the box, not the same logo as Silicon Valley, but I built the box, which could see packets and run a bunch of applications. And everyone that bought the box was like, what do we do with all this, data? I was like, well, that's a much more interesting problem, because I started an ISP in 1992, and I was at a big backbone after that, and I was at Akamai, which is recurring revenue, and I've always been into recurring revenue. And so decided, there's some hard problems there, and talked to a bunch of people, and they said, yeah, we need help running our infrastructure. We don't really have good dashboards, and, like driving a car, sort of with some speed indicators and stuff like that, and not really understanding what's going on, for their infrastructure. And then when I said, would you be willing to send me data so I could mock this up on my Usenet infrastructure? They were like, oh, we'd rather have it as a service. We know it's a ton of data. Like, we wouldn't want to actually run this. So it's like, okay, that seems aligned. So we started the company 10 years ago, 2014, mocked it up, and got a bunch of people using it and raised venture capital later 2014, and then started going.
Share with me more if you can. I'm just interested in the partnership aspect of like you founding the company with other people. Like, how did that go about?
So in hindsight, whether it was in partnership or not, another interesting thing we can talk about. I wish I had bootstrapped a little longer, because what is now called product-led growth is sort of harder to get religion about once you actually start growing and have massive customers that, that you can use people to leverage onboarding complex infrastructure, things like that. Whereas if you decide to bootstrap, not just from an economic perspective, but from a onboarding perspective, you have to seek that elegance that the lazy, the outstanding architects and developers are lazy. They seek the elegance because they don't want to do things over and over. And I wish I had done that, and it might've been with the same partners, but I had a friend who I actually introduced to run operations at Cloudflare. I had known him for some time. I had worked with him on some projects before. And, he's like, oh, you should move out to Silicon Valley and, whatever this idea that you want to do, you should start it out there. He introduced me to, they're both named Ian. Ian Pai, who was the first employee at Cloudflare, who I'd waved hello to, because a long time ago I gave them their first servers, and then again my friend Ian Applegate referred there to run operations, and we were talking and decided to start the company. And then before we raised venture capital, a friend of mine introduced me to someone that he thought I would like, who thought I was still on the internet infrastructure industry, and I thought he was in the internet infrastructure industry, but he joined to lead the sales effort at Kentik, which we weren't necessarily looking for at the time, but in hindsight has been really great. So not quite like, Silicon Valley, the show, although it was contemporaneous with us. So it was sort of amusing in a few different ways.
So you said the one of the first employees at Cloudflare?
Yes, he's I guess it can be ambiguous to say partner nowadays, but I'm old, so business partner. you use the word partner, business partner. Ian Pai, he was the first employee. He was Lee's office mate, I believe, at at Santa Cruz.
Very cool.
And Ian took I sometimes say beautiful C code. He would probably argue that. But he took my C code and rewrote it into Go. And he promised me that Go was like, okay, because I said, oh, can you do static memory allocation if you want to? Like, do you have to have a garbage collection? Oh, yeah, you could absolutely do it. Which we did later on by writing a slab allocator. So like you could, but it wasn't actually like easy. I was like, can you make static binaries? And it took us like 4 years to figure out how to make static binaries, for our agents with Go, but we figured it out. So people like Go. I'm not one of those people. I don't think that uppercase should be scope, but I don't like Python, and that's the network language, because I don't think that white space should be syntax. So, it's, I'm an old curmudgeon, and it doesn't matter because I don't write the code for the company. So.
Do you have any current favorite authors that you learned a lot from when you were writing code?
Who wrote C Traps and Pitfalls? That was a good book. I just saw it on my bookshelf. When I'm at home, I have a bookshelf of my 90s favorites. The Lions book.
That was Andrew Koenig.
That was a really good book. Andrew Koenig, C Traps and Pitfalls.
You like Martin Fowler at all?
I've met Martin Fowler. I do like him. I'm a little bit less, some of the broad pattern thinking is just not, I don't know, it's not my jam. I'm more into low-level distributed system type stuff, and a lot of the stuff he writes about is, is a little bit higher level than that. My favorite essay from Mythical Man Month is not the how many, adding birthing people doesn't make a baby faster. It's actually, there's probably a reason why the cruft is there. I forget what the title of that essay was, but, it basically says, unless you think like, when you say, oh my God, this code is so horrible, we must immediately rewrite it, not even looking at the code and understanding why it's horrible. I feel like that with the internet too. It's like, oh, let's replace all the routing protocols. Like, do you have any idea why they're working and not working, and why, again, I feel like, get off my lawn, Statler and Waldorf up in we tried that in the 1300s and the internet didn't work. We crashed the internet. But, I think there's some truth to that also. Like, you got to be careful, because there's probably some hack you did for a customer because of their bug, but you're going to break a $3 million a year customer if you don't incorporate it somehow. So.
Yes, I've got like early onset curmudgeon. I'm 35, about to be 36, and I've got 3 kids, and I just started to get like the inklings of the, hey, but it's partly maturity. It's like when you're younger, you like, we just got to do it the best way possible. It's like rip it down and like just rebuild it the best, and then you realize that, oh, there's a lot of reasons why these institutions, why these systems are in place, and like we can't just rip everything out. We have to. Then that breeds the maturity of value and delivery of value, right? Because then it's like, okay, well, if we're just going to be, we know we need to be useful to earn, and so how can we be useful, and then how can we achieve that without like breaking other things, and be very direct with it. And so that's where I'm at currently.
Innovation is awesome, but I also think that it's important to understand things that were tried and, why they worked or didn't work. And you could disagree with whether they worked or not and why they worked or didn't work, but it's important to try to understand. I saw this when, we were at Akamai and we tried to get into ad tech, and Akamai is full of super smart people. But, like when you go into an industry and you're super smart, but you have no idea why anything is the way it is, people know. And it's actually like, it's important. So if you're building a database, it's important to know what to throw out. It's important to understand that some of the stuff is important for certain reasons. Like if you want to deselect it, and we did when we built, Kentik, we were like, or it was called Cloud Helix and Hydra SQL. And actually, I forget what I called it before Ian named it Hydra SQL. But, it was like, we're not going to do that because we're going to be append only. It's like you try to figure out these constraints and do wishful architecture that allows you to get started and say, okay, well, but we've architected it so we can go do that. It's like one of my favorite content marketing sites is enterpriseready.org, I think. from Replicated. And it's like, oh, you little SaaSlets, you want to start a SaaS company? Here's the shit you need to think about. You don't need to build it. You just need to realize at some point you're going to need to do SSO. You're going to need to do role-based access control, RBAC. You're going to need to do like, some sort of logging in and access to that for the enterprise. There's a whole bunch of stuff that you're going to need to do. And it turns out it's a lot easier, even if you're not going to build it, if you don't build inconsistent with things you know you're going to need to build. So, it can be helpful.
So I was reading an article about Kentik, and they talked about how you were observing a cyber attack in Ukraine. Can you tell me about that?
Well,
we allowed to talk about that?
Yes, we're allowed to talk about that.
Okay.
It turns out that a lot of those cyber attacks are really more like kidnappings almost. It's like, DDoS detection is something that more than half of our customers use Kentik for. So real-time distributed, seeing all the telemetry in real time. Are these attacks? Are they misconfigs? Is someone pounding your API? Or is it someone from the outside just like blasting you with traffic? What should I do about it? That's a big use case for us, for folks that are internet focused. And a lot of these cyber attacks are just volumetric. So in some sense, DDoS is like, I shove your head in a toilet. And that makes it easier for me to pick your pocket. But it's not real. Is it really security? Like I get into your databases and I hack all your stuff. I believe that incident was, interesting kind of attack coming in against both infrastructure and, effectively infrastructure, sites and users in Ukraine. And unfortunately, that stuff happens an awful lot. Not only that, but another thing that we track, that Doug Midori tracks, at Kentik is just suppression of the internet, in certain regions when politically local, I guess you can say regimes, governments, don't want people to be communicating at that time. And that, it's still happening all over the world in various ways. I'm sorry that my
It's okay.
master lights just went off, but
It's all right. Your wife needed to go to bed.
yes.
So tell me, so you can abstract it to some made up government name, but how does the government actually suppress parts of the internet specifically?
Well, in a lot of countries, there's a lot of countries in the world, and in an awful lot of them, it turns out that the ISPs have to do whatever the government says. So if they say, in some countries, there's filters in place for layer 4 through layer 7 content. In some places, there's infrastructure to push layer 3, like black holes and things that the government tells you to do. And in some cases, it's find the Igor switch and just go, and then all of a sudden the cell towers go off, or the data to the cell towers go off, or the default route, if you know what that is, goes away. And you can only get internal to certain networks or applications. Like sometimes it's DNS filtering, sometimes it's, different layers. And in an awful lot of countries, dozens and dozens and dozens, probably more than half the countries in the world, it's, it may be deregulated, but it's tightly controlled. So when the Ministry of Truth, Communications, Packets, Bits, whatever, says make it stop, then they make it stop to whatever their technical capability. And that could be regionally, that could be at a layer, that could be blocking IP addresses or DNS. It's just different per different countries.
That's crazy. Do we do that here in America?
Not like that. No.
Okay.
No, we don't. I'm sitting actually in China right now. Well, in Hong Kong.
Yeah.
So that's different. But no, in America, the government does have certain abilities to subpoena information, and get court orders. And that's been going on for a very long time. And, it's a regulatory framework. But no, they can't say, make this stop, and then it will just stop. Again, they might be able to get a subpoena to instruct them to turn off a user, but not a city. Now, I don't want to get too much into politics.
Well,
There's
Twitter
definitely
files
people-
is an event that happened was covered by both, but the data was given access to both.
Yeah.
A variety of political people or writers that had a variety of political events. So it was covered in a pretty good scale, but it was definitely both sides of the government in the United States. Both parties were doing things to prohibit content from being. They were censoring content.
Okay, so now there's multiple layers, right?
Yeah.
You're familiar with the sort of the network stack, and you have transport, and so people argue, is politics layer 0 or layer 8, right, or layer 9, whatever. I'm like, where is the politics in that? But I would say it's up the stack, right? Because it's the content, right? So I think there's infrastructure, and I would say even up through layer 7, like infrastructure that's proxies, that's doing things, and down is one thing. Putting financial, like boycotts, or legal or regulatory pressure, or political pressure, or marketing pressure to show or not show something, I sort of, that's like above my pay grade. That's above the internet. That's above the infrastructure. So, but if you just look at the infrastructure side of it, including proxying it all the way down, no, that's not something that we've done. But there's definitely people, some of my libertarian friends are concerned that some of the rights that the government asserted or was talking about asserting, as we were figuring out the COVID response, are awfully close to, hey, maybe we should. And to your point, if you go way above the infrastructure, what is harmful speech? And again, that's a whole separate thing.
Yeah.
And sort of view it as above the infrastructure. So.
Okay. So in other countries, I guess to circle back to the beginning of this, in other countries, they're messing with all the layers. They'll just shut pipes off, turn entire things off. Yeah, we're not doing that here. Okay.
No. All and right. We don't have, sort of like the great firewalls, which some countries have. I've had people tell me, oh, this network copies all their packets. I'm like, I know they don't, because I know before, they were a customer, they had basically no visibility. Like I know what their infrastructure is for seeing what their network is. And I know there's no great packet taps running on, American infrastructure.
Do you think that Starlink is going to pose a problem to these countries' ability to impose these restrictions?
I think it's an interesting question. Starlink is much closer to infrastructure than VPNs, but VPNs have, been an area of concern for these countries. In fact, India's basically said, like, you cannot run VPNs in our country unless you give us the keys. And so most VPN providers have pulled out of there. Starlink so far, I think there's been some political, are they serving certain areas or not? But I think so far that's been at the level of sort of marketing and pressure and not regulatory, but I could be wrong. I'm not an expert on that.
That's fascinating to me.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely an important part of the world. And, a lot of people, like, I flew here on a flight, didn't have Wi-Fi. And I was like, well, that's, okay. I'll read a book. I've got Kindle, but I've talked to people in the last few months who are like, it's horrible. It's a crime. I don't have Wi-Fi. I'm flying 30,000 feet at, 600 miles an hour and I don't have Wi-Fi. Like, how could this happen? But, I've had enough time remembering, when that wasn't the case, that I guess it seems more amazing to me that we have it. So, but yes, it's definitely scary. There's countries as you may be following where the infrastructure is definitely being put into place that you might not be able to travel. You might not be able to bank if you have unpopular opinions. So, it's scary what technology can do, and it's great what technology can do.
Yeah, drive people towards systems that will allow them to, and then those systems will.
I'm a big fan of decentralized, and
okay.
On the other hand, you actually have to be part of, for example, banking, and you have to be a part of some of these systems. So, But how can you do that as much decentralized as possible is it's good to have options at least.
Yeah. We're having and Josh, correct me if I'm wrong. Is it David Johnson? He coined the phrase DApps. He's working on a new project. I found him through a friend of a friend, and it was called Morpheus, MOR.org, and it's essentially decentralized AI. So decentralized GPT that can it just makes it more accessible. So I can actually download it. It can run locally. It can be decentralized, and I can have it do things like I could say, hey, go buy this or make this type of transactions. And it helps with the making those types of transactions more accessible to people that don't necessarily know how to do it in a technical way. Because right now, most people that don't know how to do it in a technical way, they're buying through Coinbase or whatever exchange. And this is giving that power to them to have an agent running on their computer that can do this stuff for them. And so I thought that was a pretty interesting project. So we're doing a special episode on that in like the next 2 weeks.
This is a little bit separate, mostly separate from, sort of what I'm doing, my day job at Kentik, but it's okay. It's really interesting. We talked about software engineering and Mythical Man Month and trade-offs, right? What people say versus what people do. When there's a conflict between convenience and privacy, what percentage of people will actually go for, the privacy? And so, how do you make it maximally convenient? But then again, I think more about DApps and like communication and how do you do that with Reddit and Twitter, all those things. But, I'm a Usenet fan from way back, and obviously we figured out how to do it with chat and these other things. But there's advantages to centralized, right? I mean, I use Twitter a lot still to consume information. I try using Usenet, but there's too much garbage there, so I don't do that. I don't have enough time generally, so I spend most of my time on RSS feeds, catching up 30 days behind before Feedly marks all them as read. So
I like that convenience versus privacy, because the more convenient it is, the harder it is to get the privacy. Typically, privacy is something you have to go seek out.
Yes, and it's unfortunate, but there's a whole bunch of things that we need to sort of train people to do, right? Even before AI, just with Wikipedia and everything else, it's like amazing what we can get on the internet, but you need to have a good bullshit filter, right? You need to be able to sense emotion words and agendas and all those things. And so I think that should be a key, like, bullshit filter 101, 102, 201, 202. That should be like a high school track, this taking control of your own privacy to the extent you want to. It's unfortunate, but if you're not into technology or, and if to participate in the kind of things that everyone else does, it's really hard to do that. It could be tough, whether that's communication or, commerce or whatever. So the good news is there's a lot of people passionate about it and innovating, and we're just at the beginning. So
have you looked at the Unstoppable Domains project?
I have probably
like Web3
only
domains.
Read. Yes, I mean I have some ENS domains, but that's not the Ethereum name service. Unstoppable was something else, right? I'm fuzzy on it. It's been a few years.
Yeah, I think they used it. I haven't. I'm not an expert in this area either.
Mm-hmm.
It was a weekend rabbit hole, is what I call it.
Okay.
Right? I went on a weekend rabbit hole of Unstoppable Domains, Web3 domains, and basically how the way that they're working, in the sense that you can't go get a court order subpoena and and take it to GoDaddy or ICANN or whatever it is and just stop the domain if you don't like what's happening on the domain, right? And so that was that single utility was interesting to me. And so I started saying like, oh, well, if I want to have a domain like this, how is it gonna, work? And that's kind of where I got a little fuzzy, is if they own the lower layers, can they not just stop you from accessing those domain extensions, right?
Well, Yeah, I don't want to. I mean, we can go down to the crypto rabbit hole as much as you'd like, and I'm a little fuzzy on some of it because I haven't looked at the domain stuff, which is embarrassing because I am actually semi-official and the minister of bits for Sealand, which is a principality in the North Sea, and in partnership with them, we did Havenco, which is putting servers out in the North Sea. Over 20 years ago. And it turns out that should have been decentralized, but the tech wasn't there for it at the time. But they sell, turns out, non-fungible entities like territory and titles and things like that. So we've looked a lot at crypto and things like that. You look at a lot of the blockchain stuff, and I think you can hold in your head the two truths. One of them is an awful lot of blockchain stuff could be a MySQL or SQLite database, with an API in a couple Amazon regions. Because as you said, it's theoretically the blockchain, but if you control the interfaces to it, you could actually censor it as much as you want, right? On the other hand, there's some stuff that, is actually could be pretty practical if it were just faster, like Filecoin IPFS type stuff. And there's other stuff that, maybe as much as I like the idea, and this is something we debated for Havenco, for Sealand rather, of, if they ever did citizenship, how much of it would be tied to economics and how much of it would be tied to unique personhood, scanning your eyeball. And the way they implement it, I'm not sure that's the right way to do it either, so.
Yeah, the interplanetary file system, that thing to me is, so Filecoin and storage are like 80% of my crypto holdings
and Sia and MadeSafe, and do you have any Chia, which is,
no.
Chia makes me angry. Bram's a brilliant guy, but filling up hard disks with nothing and not storing anything on them, come on, that's not, it's greener than proof of work, but not that much. But yeah, I think the challenge is all of them are really good. I would just use Usenet. Usenet's a third of a petabyte a day, and it's fast. And it's less decentralized than when there were 100 people doing full feeds because 30 gigabytes a second, but there's a lot of people doing it. You can post and get it. I know there's been work. I know Cloudflare and other people have built IPFS gateways, and I think the innovation's great. I'm a little frustrated they took $500 million and I don't know, 5 years ago. I expect some more to come out of it. But I think the challenge, and I think storage has made some progress towards this, is you need fast and reliable. It's okay to have it be like a mesh and sort of permanent and available, but you need it to be fast and reliable, or it's this privacy and security versus convenience. Look up Tahoe-LAFS. So actually, pre-Kentik, and this is a sort of a goof aside project, Zuko of Zcash. I think it's still maintained, but they were doing a erasure-coded, decentralized, cryptographically, everything file system. And we tried to get people to use it, and sort of by nature of, are you familiar with erasure coding?
Nope.
Okay. It's like Super RAID. So think about Super RAID, where instead of all the disks being right next to each other, one way you could deploy it is so that you're running like RAID 6 on 8 disks, so you got 10 disks. But you put 5 of them in different places, in each of 2 different places. So to get any object back, you need to get some chunks from 2 places. So if someone stole, like the government walked in and took all your stuff, they get nothing. Now you extrapolate that, sort of the same underlying math of encoding, and you have 5 locations, and 8 disks is sufficient to, pull everything back, but you only have 6 disks at each location. Sounds really good, but in practice, if you deploy it like that, you'll have a buttload of latency to get anything. And so you get into these problems that some of those systems have. And I think storage has actually done a lot of work to say, maybe it's good to actually use these technologies, but we should actually make a market in it and like have some locations where it's just like S3. We incent people to run it, but they're running it in data centers and, it's fast enough and stuff like that. And it's interesting because you see, if you didn't follow Chia, it was really fascinating. because I think it was 2020, basically they went from 0 to 30 exabytes of people crawling around, Unix surplus and buying 4Us and sticking motherboards. And it was like 30 years ago at computer shows when we used to put computers together. And, running NASs basically, 36 just, in their living room for the promise of crypto. And then people would fill up data centers with them. I have friends that still run dozens of petabytes of Chia because they'll do something else with the hardware. Actually, they're using it, freaks. So they'll figure out to just do, storage with them. I just would like to see Chia be a awesome blockchain that supports, Ethereum, like, coding on top, that actually just signs objects that you store so that you're filling up these hard disks with signatures and objects, not just signatures, and not just, random garbage that's signed. I think that'd be pretty cool because it turns out that, a lot of the Chia stuff they've incented through, people interested in hype, whatever, to be in really well-connected data centers so you could do some really cool storage stuff. I think the challenge is if you look at Wasabi, which is a commercial S3 competitor, you look at Backblaze, which is an amazing company. Again, second favorite content marketing, all their hard drive reliability reports, now SSD. I think it's, Backblaze has through content marketing, pricing, nerd friendliness, a lot of different ways, their angle. I think Wasabi was going at it from a, bandwidth advantageousness, and now Cloudflare is doing it. I think it's hard to compete with S3. So, you got to think pretty carefully, why am I doing this? What am I doing? But at the same time, if you're going to do it and it's not convenient for people to use, then you have to be a little bit of a nutcase, which I am, to use some of that technology. So I think that's something that the decentralized storage people have to crack. I apologize. I geek about network and also storage and also, systems and clustering and stuff like that. So back when I became a hobbyist, there was no sysadmin network programmer. It was just nerd. So, we've sort of when I was specialized. We've specialized into different, hyper specialties. So.
Yeah, my dad was an engineer. He learned in the Air Force, and he came out and then did like odd jobs and would take me around with him to the different buildings and the projects that he had. And so I got exposure to a large variety of different types of technology, from hotel systems getting their first electronic locks, to the tax company getting their first computers, to radio companies doing all sorts of interesting things with radio towers. And so, that and back then I was just I got the privilege of being born into that family and we weren't wealthy or anything, but just because I got access to that technology and I got to see it. And so at school, I was just the nerd at school. Like I was the computer, and there was just nerd. It was like you could do websites, networking, it was all things nerd, video games included.
Yeah, it wasn't video games for me, but I was definitely nerd. But again, contemporaneously in 1978, when I got into computers when I was 8, very fortunate, family stuff. Mm-hmm. My uncle, who, was of the Elmer generation, of the, in the ham and electronics and, all that, gave me a book on BASIC. There weren't a lot of computers around that ran BASIC at the time, but my father happened to have some because he was a doctor, both doctors. He was a doctor doing medical research, and he happened to have a wizard who was a Unix bigot back then who got me into that. So it was just very fortunate. But I was going to ask if you were a ham, because it sounds like, with that kind of like going around, and a lot of those people, are into ham, and I had I started the first ISP in Philadelphia, and a lot of my customers were hams that got into building ISPs because they just love to communicate and stuff like that. But
yes, I don't do it regularly, but I have the equipment.
Okay.
I live an hour outside of Nashville in a farming community, and so we're like the smallest. We have 7 acres. We're like the smallest plot. Everyone around us is like 90, 100 acres, but they'll talk to each other. Because it's odd if we've got strangers hanging around, it's like you don't just come, we're like a secondary road. Like you there's a reason why you're here if you're here, or you're lost.
Hey, Ma, Waze is confused again.
Right? Actually, when I bought this place, I had to train Google Maps multiple times for it to even direct me back to the correct spot. Yeah, because it thought a road existed that didn't exist, and it was fun. But
that's why it's important to have a bullshit detector so you don't drive off a cliff because Google told you to.
That's the generation under me has that problem. I got lucky. Yeah. I tell people I have a brother who's 3 years older than me. He's a doctor. Sister's 3 years younger. She's a science teacher, and I was the last generation that was like what I call this, home by streetlights, right? Mm-hmm. Because I could see my sister, 3 years younger than me, and her friends, where it was like you go to jail if you're allowed outside. And then my brother and me were like locked outside so mom can watch her soaps and drink from the hose. You're not getting in the house to get roll water. She needs some me time. And so we were that like last generation where they would instruct us to go play in the woods a mile away. So I did get that. One thing I really wanted to talk with you about, I don't know if you study it or not, but I know you see a lot of traffic and you know a lot about the underlying parts of the internet and the different layers. I was having a conversation with a buddy of mine who is Dave McCall, great guy. He's the evangelist at QTS data centers. They're like the largest data center by square foot. You know them. Okay. Yep. And so Dave's an awesome guy. He's got a podcast and everything. And we were having dinner and they were telling me about how the growth is exploding. So he showed me this graph in his office and he was like, here's this graph. And he goes, point to where GPT came out. Where generative AI became mainstream. You could see it as like January, February of last year. It was like, whoa. Yeah. So you saw the hockey stick before and data storage, compute centers and all that.
Have you ever been to Ashburn, Virginia?
No.
Okay. So the center of the internet, it used to be Tyson's Corner. It used to be McLean / Vienna, Virginia. And then there just wasn't enough space. And they didn't have road zippers and there wasn't enough fiber and, they just needed more space and power. So they moved out to Ashburn, which is where Dulles is. So the Udvar Hazy Air and Space Museum expansion with the space shuttle and all that stuff. But, Dulles Airport. So around there, just north of there used to be, Unit had some stuff, WorldCom, Equinix had some stuff. And I remember when the first wholesale data center went in. And because it's right next to the one where Kentik has some stuff, I had some stuff, my personal colo is. And this massive building, it was DuPont Fabros, which is I think now owned by DRT, Digital Realty. And I was like talking to all my friends and Apple's like, oh yeah, that's our data center. And Microsoft's like, yeah, that's our data center. And Facebook's like, yeah, that's our data center. And there was the beginning of this wholesale where you buy 10 megawatts at a time. Yeah. Each room is a megawatt and you're buying 10 megawatts. And that was low power density because now they're talking about 10, 20, 30 kilowatts, a cabinet and water cooling and all that. And after COVID restrictions lifted, every time I've been out there, like I know all the back roads to get up to Route 7, all the different, areas. And it's like, there's another goddamn multi-hundred megawatt data center. Like where's, and they can do the power. They've just said like they don't want to, which is weird because they have a property tax on equipment in Loudoun County, but I don't really understand that. But yeah, the demand is massive. Now, what's interesting is you said traffic. So until, we'll say ChatGPT, even though there have been these decentralized storage things and people do a lot of storage, traffic and megawatts is pretty correlated. A lot of the AI stuff does a lot of networking using some, I don't want to say ancient, but older technology called InfiniBand or its derivatives, like Ethernet, but it isn't Ethernet, and super high bandwidth inside, but doesn't actually drive nearly as much bandwidth as, like a web server farm or some of this or cloud compute infrastructure. So I hope everyone's going to be okay. some of my friends in the data center industry have said they worry that some of the smaller competitors are signing long-term commitments for people that think they're going to be around a long time for AI, but, might run out of financing, might not get the GPUs. On the other hand, I'm bullish enough that, historically it'd be a mistake to get a bet against data centers. We've got 20 massive, call them data center companies, a couple dozen cloud data center and some massive cloud companies as customers, and I wouldn't bet against them. They're just going to grow over time. But that hockey stick is more, the internet's growing, but the space demand due to AI and power is really what we're talking about with data center. It's not actually about space. The power demand has grown much faster in the last year than the bandwidth.
Have you seen the people that are building the mobile data centers, mobile compute, essentially, and they're dropping them where there's excess energy, like abandoned solar farms and things like that?
I think that makes a lot more sense than some of what people have been doing with edge compute, like the idea that every app needs to sit next to every cell tower. It doesn't really need to be that distributed. Decentralized. Distributed is an architecture thing. Decentralized is a political thing almost, but they're related but not the same. Yes. I mean, that was another argument for investing in sort of edge AI, was not just that you could do model iteration sort of at the edge, but that you could plug them into the lamp posts and do, SETI anywhere with your AI application using power that's going to be used anyway. I don't know that much about how those folks are doing. I've just read that it's going on.
Oh yeah, I actually just invested in a fund that's doing it.
Oh, cool.
And so I learned all about it, because there's the energy people that know energy, there's the capital people that know capital, and then there's the compute, like the operators that know.
Yeah.
And so this firm was like bringing these three things together, and because the capital doesn't know how to evaluate the deals. They're like, it's a compute box that they're putting on this energy, surplus energy.
Yeah, and it turns out there's a lot of energy that just needs to be produced. I mean, the way that energy is produced is you can't just turn it off when there's no demand. Like, you have to be producing. Nuclear.
Otherwise, you pay. It's curtailment cost. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. It's like the cars. It's like if your regenerative brakes. If your battery's too full, you don't have big heat sinks on the back of the car. You can't use the regenerative brakes if the battery's too full. It can be hard to wrap your head around.
Yeah.
For a software guy, studied physics, and I have built more crappy electronics project than you'd ever want to see, and discovered that
cheese boards everywhere. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I have soldered, I have repaired things with solder, but breadboards is my thing, and if I'm going to hook it up to an actual computer that I care about, like relays and opto isolators and shit like that. So, but yes, I used to inhabit, never worked at a Radio Shack, but I used to inhabit them a fair bit. So
I used to spend quite a bit of time at the radio. And my dad had like a mini Radio Shack on his workbench with all the little
well, we had Verback and Radarman, and my grandfather built machines for people until he built a machine to make his own manufacturing business. So he had a whole thing. We took like reading pacers that would go, like a thing up like this, and built like elbow joints, built a robot. When we say we, I mean my grandfather really designed it, and it made me do the circuit diagrams, but he was the system architect, and it was a tool to, get me to, trained in safety and using the bandsaw. And he was like, no, you need to wear shoes. I cannot wear shoes because I've been working in a machine shop with metal shavings in my socks for, 50 years. But, how to, been punished for not putting the tools back, all that stuff.
So, and just so I can put a pin on our last thought and wrap that up. So you have seen, as far as energy and all that, you have seen there is an increase in traffic, but it's not like directly 1-to-1 of the increase in storage and compute, because there's a lot of stuff happening internally. Storage, it's a little bit closer, but the compute and the whole separate topic is there's stuff that is really confusing even to people that are really plugged in, which is, are we going to have network meshes or service meshes? Where is all this stuff going to be done, and how is this going to evolve? And are we going to have sidecars or not sidecars? And where does load balancing and telemetry and health checking and all this stuff get done? That's confusing.
there's a lot of people trying to say, well, the storage needs network processors and the network processors need to know storage and we're going to have different buses. And there's a lot of that evolving technology, most of which is not mainstream. But generally, when people put a whole ton of hard disks in, there's going to be some bandwidth use, not as much as for the compute. But GPU compute often pulls much more locally than sort of over the network. So yes, inside that infrastructure, which could be campus-wide, the network's pretty big, but from the internet, which is where we've got, 500 data sources, which we're seeing about 250 of them let us do aggregate use for Doug Midori's work. That sees inside data centers, but people don't let us aggregate that. They let us aggregate, across views of the internet, and it doesn't, and the GPU stuff just isn't driving that much internet traffic. Even the generative, there's traffic for some of the generative video and images and videos, there and coming, but it isn't that much. Now one could argue it's more YouTube uploads and stuff like that. So it'd be sort of hidden in other things if the AI is in-shitifying us, as Cory Doctorow, believes. But I'm not saying he's wrong. But I don't think it's hard. I think it's still noise compared to baseball games that get uploaded to YouTube, but I don't have a data to point to for that. You'd have to talk to someone at Google.
Yeah, I just had a conversation with somebody about Spotify and them working on their issues with storage because people are uploading tons of generated music like rapidly.
Yep.
And so now they're trying to put a ceiling on it or a floor, whatever you want to call it. But basically, if your content's not getting X amount of engagement within Y time, then it's not gonna store it, So
interesting.
Yeah, they're talking about offloading because they were full. My brother-in-law is a music producer, so he's not a technology guy, but he was just like, I was at Spotify's headquarters and they're telling me how their data centers are full and they can't store anything more. I was like, well, that's not exactly how storage works, but what they're saying is according to their business model of how much they're going to spend on
it's
storage.
It's not like they can't figure out how to do it. Yes.
I
know the Spotify folks. They're not. Yeah, they could do it if they wanted to.
They could do it.
I think in-shitification is a much bigger threat than Skynet. If you're going to be worried about something.
Can you give me the 30, I don't know this, the 30-second overview is what is this?
Oh, Skynet or in-shitification?
No, in-shitification.
So Cory Doctorow, who I've been following since he wrote When Sysadmins Rule the Planet, which is a great short story about how Usenet saves the world. Basically a bunch of people in data centers with air filtration are the only people that survive. And then how do they, try to reconstruct society or not? He's been writing about sort of the potential dystopian side effects of technology for some time. And he's very concerned about large centralized technology companies and, their ability to, apply policy with intended and unintended consequences. Also, about some of the consequences of AI and, if you can generate content, that looks close, can program people, all this stuff. So he's a good guy to follow. I think is he a part owner of Boing Boing? Might be.
I don't know. What's his last name? Cory what?
Doctorow, D-O-C, O-T-O,
I could probably Google could correct that.
Sorry,
right?
It's late for me. Yeah,
I'm sorry, man. We're gonna wrap up.
Yeah,
here.
He's a famous science fiction author, science fiction, fantasy, etc. So
really,
more science fiction actually. Science fiction.
Craphound.com looks like his.
Yeah. You should follow, if you want to follow stuff like this, and Bruce Schneier sort of sometimes. If you want to think about, by the way, I didn't coin privacy versus convenience. I'm sure it was Bruce Schneier or someone like that, that did. It's
spell his name again. Bruce
Schneir, probably.
You might not know this
writes about
me,
security.
But I am a huge fan of movies, and I love new story. When you said that storyline just now, my mouth was watering. I was like, "Are you kidding me? That is so unique. I've never seen a movie on that. I've never read a book on that. If there's a book about that, makes so much sense, right? Some virus or something happens, and then they have filtered
the people
air.
Live in air filtration, and then they have to, do Usenet.
That's amazing.
Yeah, Ender's Game filtered out the part that I think is really fascinating about the books, which is they actually posited this worldwide thing called the net, where reasoned intellectual discourse happened. They got that wrong, but it was interesting. Yeah, there was information warfare because these two brilliant children actually adopted alter egos, Locke and Demosthenes, and sort of did the DI thing and programmed the populace towards politics. It was a little prescient.
These are fascinating stuff. When you come across that, think of me. Be like, if you come across cool stuff like that, just be like, I'm just going to forward this to Joel.
My wife and I met at the World Science Fiction Convention in Chicago in 1991. So I've been following this stuff for a while. Yes.
Okay.
If I really don't like you, I'll start forwarding you some lit RPG series that I like, which is a trashy subgenre of both fantasy and science fiction that actually often posits. Sometimes the god or goddess picks you up and puts you in a universe where you've got game type mechanics, and sometimes it's you upload yourself to VR, and sometimes anyway, it's a guilty pleasure.
That is interesting. We need to forward some of that stuff to Hollywood. Get some of those. All we've got is like a couple Ready Player Ones out here.
Yeah.
We need more. Yeah. I want to do a little bit of work with you real quick before we wrap up. The problem that people are experiencing when they think that Kentik might be a solution, or if they're having this problem and you see, okay, a lot of my customers are having these sets of problems and that's why they seek us out. For anyone who's listening that might be having these problems, what are they?
Performance or security problems in your network infrastructure, or you are the people that run that infrastructure and you spend way too much time on bullshit. People reporting problems and you're still debugging it by the time the problem's gone away. You need to work with your peers, and I don't know if you've heard of MTTI, mean time to innocence. So we take all the data, keep it we've used machine learning. Now we're using LLMs with the appropriate guardrails to try to help people do their jobs better, surface the insights, point them to where they need to look at. A little bit of automated remediation. The network industry promises that's possible. I think it's a little bit early for, Skynet-driven networks, but making the job of the network professionals easier, helping them work with other groups. Sometimes that's security. Usually it's operations. And, on the business side, it's, if your business is dependent on the network, to connect your people, to have your revenue flow. The other observability systems don't really understand the network infrastructure unless you're only super hipster eBPF in the cloud, which is Kubernetes doesn't have an ESP driver. So like it still needs to generate packets that flow over some network somewhere, and someone's got to make it work. So that's Kentik's jam.
Nailed it. It's just Kentik.com, the network observability platform. Everything you ever wanted to know about your network, from data center to container to cloud. I'm just reading off your homepage.
That's very elegantly spoken.
Thank you. Avi, thank you so much for doing this. We made a podcast. How do you feel?
Awesome.